Close your eyes for a moment and place yourself in the boots of a 20-year-old soldier advancing through a war-torn European village in the autumn of 1944. The enemy has withdrawn, leaving behind an eerie silence that feels almost more threatening than the artillery fire you endured hours before. Every abandoned building, every fallen weapon, every piece of debris could be your last sight on Earth. The question isn't whether death awaits you in this ghost town, but where it's hiding and whether you'll be clever enough to spot it before it's too late. Welcome to Ancient Edge, where today we're descending into one of the most terrifying dimensions of World War II combat, the invisible war of booby traps and psychological warfare that transformed ordinary objects into instruments of calculated terror. When we think of World War II, our minds conjure images of massive tank battles, aerial dogfights, and amphibious assaults. Yet beneath this grand theatre of mechanized warfare ran a darker, more insidious conflict that preyed not on armies but on individual soldiers' instincts and humanity. Unlike the static trench systems of the First World War, where soldiers faced each other across no man's land for months or years, World War II was a war of movement, advance, and retreat. This fluidity created a new tactical reality. As forces withdrew, they left behind not just scorched earth, but carefully orchestrated landscapes of death. The philosophy underlying these traps represented a calculated shift in military thinking. Commanders on both sides recognized that killing wasn't always the primary objective. A dead soldier required only a grave, but a maimed soldier required stretcher-bearers, medical personnel, transportation, surgical facilities, and months of recovery resources. One well-placed booby trap that cost perhaps a few cents worth of materials and 5 minutes to install could tie up dozens of enemy personnel and countless resources. More importantly, these devices achieved something conventional weapons could not. They infected advancing armies with paralyzing paranoia, transforming every mundane action into a potentially fatal decision. The true genius of World War II booby traps lay not in their explosive power, but in their understanding of human nature. German and Japanese engineers didn't simply place explosives randomly. They studied their enemy's behavior with the precision of psychologists. They understood that soldiers under stress fall into predictable patterns, that exhausted men seek comfort in familiar rituals, and that victorious troops instinctively reach for souvenirs to commemorate their survival. Consider, for a moment, the infamous crooked painting trap employed by German forces in abandoned French and Belgian buildings. Wehrmacht sappers would, quite deliberately, hang a picture frame at a slight angle on the wall of an otherwise intact room, right in the midst of a damaged structure. They really understood their adversary intimately. American and British officers, who were products of middle-class upbringings where orderliness was a virtue, possessed an almost compulsive need to straighten a tilted frame. The act required no conscious thought, just an automatic reach, to restore order. But behind that frame, a pressure release mechanism connected to explosives waited, almost patiently. When the officer straightened the picture, removing the pressure from the hidden trigger, the explosion would devastate the room, killing everyone present. This wasn't just a trap. It was, in fact, a weapon forged from cultural conditioning and social psychology. The booby-trapped souvenir represented an even more sophisticated exploitation of human desires. After weeks or months of brutal combat, soldiers naturally sought tangible proof of their victory and survival. A German Iron Cross, a Luger pistol, a Japanese officer's sword. These weren't just objects, but powerful symbols of triumph over an enemy that had tried to kill them. Retreating Axis forces understood this hunger for trophies and weaponized it with chilling effectiveness. They would, quite deliberately, place appealing items in prominent locations, connecting them through nearly invisible wires to grenades or larger explosive charges. The soldier reaching for that memento had perhaps just 1 second to realize his fatal mistake before the blast tore through him and his comrades. Beyond exploiting psychological vulnerabilities, World War II trap designers created entire environments of uncertainty where, honestly, nothing could be trusted. The pressure-release mine inverted soldiers' expectations about explosive devices. While troops learned to watch for tripwires and suspicious ground disturbances, the pressure-release trap turned this very vigilance against them. A seemingly abandoned jerrycan of fuel, a valuable commodity in a war of mechanized movement, would rest innocuously beside a road. Beneath it, the weight of the full container held down a spring-loaded firing mechanism. When a soldier lifted the can to claim this prize, the release of pressure armed and detonated the explosive. The very act of trying to secure useful materials became a potentially fatal gamble. Japanese forces in the Pacific Theater elevated environmental integration to an art form. In the dense jungles where they fought, visibility extended only a few meters in any direction. They revived and refined ancient techniques, creating modern variations of punji sticks concealed in undergrowth along likely approach routes. These weren't the crude, sharpened bamboo stakes of historical warfare, but carefully engineered obstacles, often smeared with human waste, to ensure infection in any wound. More sophisticated versions incorporated small explosive charges that would detonate when a soldier fell onto the stakes, guaranteeing fatal injuries. The Germans brought industrial precision to trap design in urban environments. Entire buildings became elaborate death machines, where every element, from the staircase to the furniture, might conceal an explosive surprise. A particular step would be weakened and rigged to collapse when weight was applied, dropping the victim onto explosives planted in the space below. Cellars that offered perfect defensive positions or shelter from artillery fire would be wired to explode hours after occupation, giving the enemy time to settle in and lower their guard before the building collapsed on them. Even doors could be rigged in multiple ways. Push it open, and a grenade detonated. Pull it closed behind you, and another device activated. Perhaps the most diabolical aspect of these trap systems was their interconnection. Engineers developed sequences of explosives designed to exploit learned behavior and rescue instincts. A relatively small initial explosion might wound several soldiers, prompting their comrades to rush to their aid. This predictable response triggered secondary charges positioned precisely where rescuers would gather, multiplying casualties exponentially. Some systems included tertiary explosives timed to detonate when medical personnel arrived, turning the natural human impulse to save the wounded into an accomplice of mass death. Among the most morally repugnant, yet tactically effective traps were those involving human remains. Both sides, though more commonly the Germans and Japanese, would booby-trap the bodies of fallen soldiers, knowing that opposing forces would attempt to recover their dead for proper burial. The calculation was coldly practical, exploiting the bonds of unit cohesion and the universal desire to honor fallen comrades, transform compassion into a liability. Soldiers approaching a deceased colleague would trigger explosives hidden beneath or beside the body, creating additional casualties while simultaneously attacking the psychological foundations of military morale. Tombstones and grave markers in contested territories received similar treatment. This tactic served multiple purposes. It denied the enemy the ability to pay respects to their dead. It created lasting terror even in supposedly safe rear areas, and it forced military organizations to develop elaborate protocols for handling any situation involving casualties, further slowing operations and consuming resources. The immediate tactical effectiveness of these trap systems was undeniable, but their legacy extended far beyond World War II's conclusion. The principles perfected during this conflict became the foundation for modern improvised explosive device design. Insurgent forces in conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan studied World War II booby-trap manuals, adapting these techniques to contemporary contexts. The same psychological principles that made a crooked painting deadly in 1944 make a suspicious object beside a road lethal in modern asymmetric warfare. The environmental impact of these weapons, well, it persists decades after the war's end. Unexploded ordnance from World War II still kills and maims civilians across Europe and the Pacific. In 2025, bomb disposal teams in Germany evacuate neighborhoods regularly to neutralize bombs and booby traps discovered during construction projects. The French countryside contains zones where farming remains impossible due to the concentration of unexploded munitions from 2 world wars. These physical remnants serve as enduring monuments to the war's destructive reach. The ethical questions raised by booby trap warfare ultimately led to international legal restrictions. The 1980 Protocol on Prohibitions or Restrictions on the Use of Mines, Booby Traps and Other Devices attempted to regulate these weapons, recognizing their disproportionate impact on civilian populations and their tendency to remain dangerous long after conflicts end. Yet the genie could not be fully returned to its bottle. The knowledge of how to transform everyday objects into instruments of death remains accessible to anyone willing to search for it. The story of World War II booby traps forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about warfare and human ingenuity. The same creativity that builds civilizations can be turned to destruction with terrifying efficiency. The traps we've examined today weren't products of sadism or cruelty, but of desperate calculation by military forces seeking any advantage in an existential struggle. They represent warfare stripped of romanticism, reduced to its essential nature, the application of violence to break an enemy's will to fight. For the soldiers who face these invisible enemies, the psychological scars often outlasted physical wounds. Veterans who survived booby trap encounters frequently reported lasting anxiety, an inability to trust their surroundings, and compulsive checking behaviors that persisted decades after returning home. The traps achieved their ultimate purpose not just in the casualties they inflicted, but in the permanent alteration of survivors' relationship with the world around them. Understanding these grim innovations matters because it completes our picture of what total war truly means. These weren't battles between armies on defined fields, but conflicts that penetrated every aspect of the environment, turning homes into tombs and everyday objects into executioners. They remind us that the costs of war extend far beyond battlefield deaths, rippling through time and space to claim victims who weren't born when the traps were set. The ingenuity displayed in creating these systems could have revolutionized peacetime engineering, medicine, or construction. Instead, it was channeled into ever more sophisticated methods of killing. This represents perhaps the greatest tragedy, not just the lives lost, but the human potential diverted from creation to destruction. The brilliant minds that might have cured diseases or solved technical challenges, instead calculating the optimal placement of explosives beneath a dead comrade. As we emerge from this dark chapter of military history, we carry with us a sobering reminder that technological advancement and strategic innovation are, morally neutral tools. They amplify human intentions, whether constructive or destructive. The same culture that produced Beethoven and Goethe created the crooked painting trap. The same societies that gave us constitutional democracy and human rights developed systematic methods for turning compassion into a fatal weakness. If you found today's journey into the hidden dimensions of World War II both troubling and illuminating, well, you've understood exactly what we aimed to convey. History isn't just the story of great leaders and decisive battles. It's also the story of individual soldiers navigating landscapes designed to kill them in ways both visible and invisible. Subscribe to Ancient Edge to continue exploring these forgotten corners of history, where the past reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature and the price of conflict. Share this video with anyone interested in military history beyond the sanitized narratives, and join us next time as we uncover more secrets that time has tried to bury. The past has lessons to teach, but only if we're willing to confront all of it, even the parts that make us deeply uncomfortable. Until then, remember that understanding the worst of what humans can create is the first step toward ensuring we choose differently in the future.